Hello, hello, everyone. This is the Everyday Stranger podcast, and I'm your host, Alonzo Williams Jr. Today is Wednesday, which means today we are kicking off another episode of the IG Stranger of the Week, where I interview a random stranger from my IG feed. Today, I am joined by Anya. Instagram name, Anya Dula _HTX. Now listen, y'all, I am in the mood to learn something new today, and I have the feeling that this episode is the one. Let's get it. All right, great. So we are officially on the air. So before we begin, would you like to introduce yourself, tell the people who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Anya. I am a doula in the Houston area. I serve the greater Houston area. And so what that means is I take care of pregnant women and their families and providing education, emotional, physical support before their pregnancy or during their pregnancy, during labor, and postpartum as well.
Nice. Okay. So I'm a big fan of the why, like why we do what we do, right? So I guess my first question to that would be, well, when did you discover that you wanted to do to become a doula? Doula, am I saying it right? Doula. Doula. Okay.
Doula. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I'm gonna have to adjust my my tongue for that one. But doula. Doula, right? Okay. Okay. So when did you discover that you wanted to be a doula, and then also what's the why behind it?
Okay, yeah. So so a little background on me is that I'm a nurse, actually. I worked as a nurse for over 16 years in women's health. Mm-hmm. So basically, like whenever women go and get their annual checkups at their gynecologist, that's the type of work that I did. Mm-hmm. Women who are there to see their for their prenatal care, that's the kind of work that I did. I left nursing because I kind of burned out.
She's saying.
I just kind of burned out. Yeah, it's like, and burnout is kind of a vague thing, but it's just one of those situations where you're like, I don't really align with the way the system is doing these things anymore, and so. That's why I left nursing. I went to teach high school for a little bit. For 3 years, I taught high school health science. So those are the students who are planning to become healthcare professionals as they get older. And so I had a lot of fun teaching them. And, like everything went well in the classroom, in my classroom anyway. I had a really good time. But I found myself just missing that connection that I had when I was taking care of women as a nurse. And so I was just kind of like, okay, well, what can I do? Because I enjoyed being in the classroom, and I was like, I'll hang out here for some time. But I was like, well, let me see what I can do part-time that will like give me that, like help my little fix.
Right.
Taking care of women, but still allow me to be in the classroom. And you know how it is. You just like online one night, 2, 3 in the morning, and you're just like coming across things. And so I was like, oh, this doula thing is how I can actually like start my own business and maybe do this as a part-time gig for a little bit and just see where it goes. And so I did that, went to do the training, and then everything just took off from there. And so now I am a full-time doula.
Nice. Okay, I like that. That's the story right there. Well, look, before we continue, you're the first one who I actually forgot to ask the number one question, the question that I always ask my guests. But because you mentioned what you do, and I'm like, okay, this is my first time actually like knowing about something like this. I got interested fast, and I forgot to ask you my number one question, which is, what is life's greatest lesson been for you?
Life's greatest lesson. So I was thinking about this because I listened to your podcast.
Well, thank you.
What would I say? I think that, so life's greatest lesson for me has just been like there's always an option. There are always multiple options. Okay. There's always something to do. If you're not happy with where you are, if you feel stuck where you are, if you, and I mean, I'm talking about like you're lost at the park, there are options. Get yourself out of there. You know, like, you
right.
gotta look, you gotta do the work, and you gotta get yourself out of there. If you're at a dead end job, you know, you gotta do some work and do some research and find your way out of there. But I think that's been the main thing. And like in that little bit of story that I told you, like I started out in the Army. I had no intentions of being a nurse. The Army told me I was going to be a nurse. And so I was like, all right, but I knew my other options around that. If I didn't like it, I wound up loving it. So I stayed there. But then when that didn't work out anymore, I was like, oh, well, you know, let me go get this teaching certificate.
Right.
so I could teach. And then when I was like, okay, I still need something different, you know, then so that way you're constantly evolving. You're always learning, always meeting new and different people. So, yeah, that's been my life's biggest lesson. Just there's always options.
Nice. I see. So it seemed like you kind of, you know, you jumped into different fields, different experiences, and you stayed there for a little bit, and you kind of noticed yourself kind of, would you say that you mastered that particular thing until you felt like, okay, I need to like really change some things because I don't want to, you know, I feel like I'm reaching my plateau in this, and you know, I want to be able to explore other endeavors. Do you feel like it was like that, or do you feel like, you know, you just kind of got bored of it?
I think it's a little, it certainly is not, I wouldn't even say mastery. You know, when I was nursing, like there are certain levels that you can get to, right? There are certain levels that you can get to, and that's not just in nursing, but in American workplace culture, right? There's always levels. You work your way up to a level, and you get that level. You're either making a, you know, a lateral move, or you can keep climbing higher. And then there are times for me where I like realize, well, I don't really want to go higher in this aspect over, you know, I don't want to make a lateral move either. So, you know, what else is there for me to do? But I really just think that has a lot to do with like, I grew up as an Army brat, and then I joined the Army myself. So
wow.
I'm used to like every 3-year kind of reboot and change. And so I think my body works that way. You know, like my mind works that way, my soul works that way. And it's just like, okay, what's new? What else can I get into? What else can I learn? And that always takes me somewhere new.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because like I grew up, my father was in the military, so I grew up an Army brat. And we, you know, I found myself moving to different places. Like there wasn't really a place where I can call home. And I mean, well, at least for a little while. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So I mean, like I'm able to
like not a physical home place, but it's just like people in your heart that you met along the way.
Yeah. Before that, I'm able to identify with a lot of the things you're saying, how you went from, you know, like in the Army to nursing and then being a teacher, and then you was like, yo, you know, I just want to I kind of enjoyed this place over here. Let me go back to this. You know, I see myself doing the same thing. You know, just repeating it. The only thing is we're adults now, right? So, So this is really. I mean, really, this is so. So being a doula. Okay, I got it right this time. There we go.
You got it.
So being a doula, this isn't. Would you consider this to be a? What's the word I'm looking for? Is this a more common way of handling birth, or is this more of a less common, or how you say less? I don't know, because it's not in the hospital, right? This is at in-home birth type stuff, right?
So let me just go ahead and clear up some misconceptions.
Okay,
so,
great.
Doulas are not only in home, and in fact, all of the births that I have attended so far have been in hospitals.
Okay.
So the clients who come to, the clients who have found me and have decided that I'm the doula, that they want to be on their journey with them, they are having hospital births. The reason that they're choosing a doula is because if you've heard in the news here recently, the last couple of years, maternal mortality in the United States is the worst that it's been in any of the developed nations in the world. And so, like, while other countries' maternal mortality rates are either keeping steady or they're dropping, meaning less women are harmed or die during childbirth or surrounding childbirth, right?
Wow.
So in the U.S., that number is climbing, and it's climbing pretty steadily. And that's for all women in the U.S., but for Black women, it is in most places 3 to 4 times worse for Black women, meaning 3 to 4 times more Black women die than white women.
Wow.
And so and like in places like New York, it's as high as like 11%.
Now, why is this though? This is very interesting. Like, why is this though?
So, in general, the reason why U.S. maternal mortality as a whole is rising is because of the overuse of interventions. So it's like the doctors have their hands in too much stuff. They're just doing way too much.
I see what you're saying.
They're not allowing birth to, birth is a natural process. And if you think about back in the day before we had hospital systems and, all these doctors, we had midwives who were in the community, whether they were actually called midwives or whether it was just the woman who everyone knew was,
facts.
the one who could take care of women. Birth played out the way birth was going to play out. Most of the time it was going to be fine.
Right.
Of course, there are emergency situations where these interventions come in and are very helpful and useful, but we're overusing them. And so that's causing harm to a lot more people than should be happening. Now, the reason specifically for Black women that it's even worse is because and so what they used to say, like even 5 years ago, their answer would have been, well, Black women have less access to care, they're poor, they're not as educated. Well, what we found out in the last year or so is that when you account for all of those differences, so even for Black women who have a PhD, they're still 3 to 4 times more likely or at risk of dying than a white woman who doesn't even have a high school education.
Wow.
And so when we account for the difference in education, when we account for, that these Black women are well-to-do, they have good jobs, they have good access to health care, they have education, they have agency, they speak up for themselves. What's happening is that the medical system, I'm so sorry about that, is not listening to us.
Oh no, that's a problem.
So right. And so there's this idea that like Black women don't know what we're talking about, or when we complain that we're in pain, we're not really listened to. And this is all historical. It's just kind of been built into the culture of obstetrics and gynecology. And so so that's what's happening. It's just flat out racism.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That leads me to another question, because I was watching, I forgot what it was. It was some show, or I don't know. They were doing some kind of like random test, and what they would do, they would take a different race group and place them in like 2 different hospitals, and then in one hospital, there'd be a Black man who's being treated by a white doctor, and then they'll take the same Black man and then put him with a Black doctor, and then the outcome of all of that was, the Black man giving like the Black doctor better reviews, just because of how they, treated the symptoms or whatever it may be, but because he felt like he was actually able to connect with the doctor as well. Like they were able to develop a easier friendship or relationship with each other, a deeper connection, versus, the white doctor, where he just kind of felt like, he was just there and just going through this procedure kind of thing, and not really being educated on what was happening, Do you see that happening, like in the same case, in the medical field for women as well. Do you feel like that should be something that should be brought up in the hospitals? Is like stuff like that?
Well, that's absolutely. And so what we're talking about right there is cultural competence, right? Mm-hmm. So what's happening is that there's a barrier between that Black patient and the white physician, and that there's not, the communication doesn't pass that barrier of the cultural difference that comes between them. Right. And so I like to give this example when I talk about that. I some years ago when I was working in New York, we had a patient who was an older Black woman, and I was young at this time. I was like 23 or 24, right? Yeah. She was an older Black woman, probably mid-50s, and she had really bad high blood pressure. Her blood pressure was it was dangerously high, and she was coming to us for a very minor problem. When we're prioritizing what problem is the worst and needs to be handled, the blood pressure needed to be handled, and we shouldn't do what she needed us to do without her blood pressure being handled first, right? So the doctor checked off all the checklists, right? The doctor that I worked with, she's wonderful. She checked off everything. She checked her blood pressure. She checked this. She checked that. She checked this. We tell her, you need to follow up with your internist. She comes back a couple of months later. She never followed up with her internist. She still has this minor problem she wants us to address. The doctor tells her everything again. Check this, check this, check this, check this. So she's doing everything right, but she sends the patient out again, and the patient comes back again in another couple of months, and she still has not seen her internist. And this time her blood pressure was just like really dire, right? It's an emergency number at this point. And so what I realized as a very young nurse in that moment was that I had to talk to her the way that I would talk to my aunt or my grandmother, or, I had to get with her and be like, ma'am,
right.
You gonna have a stroke in the middle of the street is what's about to happen to you, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't want anybody thinking that that's how they need to address people.
No, but
I read the situation and I realized like twice the information didn't get through to her for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It didn't get through to her, and we can't keep letting this happen. But there's a cultural barrier that was taking place between the doctor that I worked with, who's a wonderful physician, and this woman, and they're not seeing each other. So my job as the nurse was to come in and make that happen. So I believe the biggest issue or the biggest resolve for this situation is to teach cultural competence in healthcare facilities.
Yeah.
And not just teach it like on random, days, but like the same way that when you go to a job, you have to take OSHA training and customer service training and sexual harassment training, like all of those things that are standard training.
Yeah.
That's what should be in hospital systems. Right now, it's not.
Oh man, that's a problem then. I totally agree with you on that though. It's very necessary. Technically, you think about it, it's almost like you have to learn, if not everything, because we're not naturally, like say, you take someone who wasn't born in the same areas that we were born or whatever, they may not be able to get it completely like how things work, but when you break it down to it, or when you break it down, like really, it's kind of like you're learning to speak another person's language by understanding their culture or, whatever it may be, their circumstance, rather than trying to, try to, I guess, just use your
Make
own.
Make them fit in a textbook is what's happening. It's like, in the medical profession, we want everybody to fit into the normal range, like everything that's within normal limits and what the textbook says. But life is messy.
Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same as textbook.
Places and when we live in places like Houston, Texas, it gets even messier because people are coming from so many different cultural values and value systems, and every culture has a different view of health, and if you don't know how to speak to those people in their health language, in the way that their culture understands health, then you can't really help them. We're just running people around in circles, and it gets dangerous.
Big time. Definitely, I totally agree with that. Nice stuff. Well, I want to go back to the doula thing again. I'm really liking this. I feel like I'm gonna have to do more interviews about this. um, so okay, so and this is I probably have like maybe 3 more questions. So the first question is were there any things that you've seen that you maybe have seen from other doulas or the medical field in general that you felt that you wanted to change or improve? Therefore, you kind of went independent and made the attempt to improve those or change those things.
Yeah. So one of the biggest concerns one of the things that that bothered me when I was working as a nurse, and then I'd gotten into management, so I had gotten promoted to, management.
Right.
And so at that point, you're like more on the business operations side, and the bottom line becomes the goal, right? It's the end all be all. And so what I saw happening is that like doctors are being forced to see more and more patients that they can't really handle. And so that means that they're getting much less time with their patients, which means that if a woman does have a concern, it's probably not going to be addressed because of just the way, like, we're rushing people in and out and moving them here and there. And, if they have too many more questions, then we're rescheduling them for another appointment. And do you live in Houston? Like, how the medical center works. You got to pay for parking.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Sometimes it's hell to get down there into the medical center. And so, when you're talking about people who are having major problems, people who can't afford to take off work, that's how you wind up with these situations where things are missed. So that was one of the biggest things, was just, I was like, oh, okay, like, we're trying to run healthcare like Toyota runs their factories in Japan. Like, we're trying to run healthcare the way that Ford set up the model, way back in the day. And it's becoming much less people-centered, much less family-centered, and more physician-centered, and not even physician-centered, actually, probably more administration and insurance-centered. Right. And so everything revolves around there. And everything is wrong with that. Right.
I see what you mean. That makes perfect sense.
You can't care for people if you're, if the end all be all is just the bottom line. Right. Because we're not actually providing care at that point.
I see what you're saying.
We're like hustling for dollars.
Right. Oh, man. I don't want to get on that. But I know exactly what you mean. So I'm really curious about this. Were you ever, now or even as a child, were you ever given a story on how your birth went? You being born? Like, did you have any, I don't know, a unique story on how you were born?
That's interesting that you asked that question. So, this is what I know. So, the interesting thing is that I gave birth to my first son at the same hospital that my mother gave birth to me at.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so what I know of my birth story is just kind of like bits and pieces, but I know that for one, I was a huge baby. I think I was a 9-pounder.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
I think that was my sister.
And so I know that my mom was like in a lot of pain, and my grandmother was there with her. My grandmother was also there with me when I gave birth. So when I was in labor, I was really quiet and just kind of withdrawn in, and the nurses, and I was really young. I was a teenager. Right. And so the nurses were all just like marveling at how well I was handling it. And my grandmother was like, your mother was crazy. Your mother was yelling and screaming and hooping and hollering.
Oh, wow.
And so I do know that immediately after giving birth to me, my mother like passed out or fainted, and she was like out for some time before she came back. But I don't know that it was like a medical emergency or issue. It just sounds like it was all very overwhelming.
Right.
For her. Yeah. So yeah, that's my birth story.
Wow. Was there any similarities between because you said you have a son?
Yeah, I have two sons actually, but yeah, my oldest one is the one who was born. We were born in Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville, Tennessee. I got my uncle stay out there. That's what I'm talking about. Good old Nashville. Yeah. But where do you? I mean, just to ask, like, let's take like your first son then. Were there any similarities between how you were born versus how your son was born, or as far as story wise?
I think just the fact that my grandmother was there, that it was at the same hospital. I mean, at that point, my mom was an adult. I was a teenager, but I think that those are the main, is that my grandmother was there for both of us. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was trying to see if there was any connection between you being the doula and, I mean, just your birth date, I guess you could say, and everything. But
oh yeah. Well, I'll say this, that there's so if I think you asked the question earlier and we kind of got off, but like, is this a common thing or is this a new thing, the doula?
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is that, like, back before hospitals and back before people like moved away from their villages, right, their family, their main family structure, it was whoever was in your family. Your grandmother was going to be your doula, whether you knew the term doula or not. Right. Your aunt was going to be, right, like your cousin. Some woman in the family was who was going to be there with you to take care of you. And so that's a role that has always been here, whether or not people have known to use that actual name with that role. I think that has become what's new. It's newer. But so when I started doing this, when I started my doula business and I wrote a blog post about how I had doulas, but I didn't realize it, and my doulas were my grandmothers, and my grandmother told me I owe her money.
Oh, wow.
She was like, I think you owe me some money then.
Wow, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's interesting, yeah. Real interesting. All right, well, I have one more question for you. And of course, I guess you say this is the theme question. First off, how has your relationship been with strangers, and have you had any recent encounters, one that you probably remember the most?
So I'm a person who like almost never meets a stranger.
Really?
Like, I'm the person who enjoys having airport conversations.
Okay.
With total strangers.
Those are like the best places though, honestly. Though.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I'm never the one to initiate these conversations. Like, I usually try to just chill, back in the cut and mind my business. And
yeah.
But somebody always finds their way over. But I'll say that, like, those are a lot of the most interesting conversations that I have with people. And I really I kind of enjoy the idea of, like, getting to know someone in that small amount of time, because it's amazing how much people are willing to reveal and divulge.
Yeah, I believe it.
When you like realize that you're not ever going to see this person again, Right. And so I really do enjoy having conversations like that. And it doesn't have to be in the airport. I mean, sometimes just hanging out here in Houston,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And have you had any memorable encounters, like ones that you can actually like talk about, or are they just kind of like real fast and you forget about them later?
Okay, I'll tell you one. This is a story that my students really enjoyed whenever I told it. But this was a few years back when I worked in the medical center, and I used to park, where the Sears building that they just tore down over by the metro station. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I used to park over there. And one morning I parked, and there was a man who appeared to me to be homeless. He came to the back of my car, and then he bent down. So I didn't know what he was doing. I don't know what's going on, but I have to get to work. I don't have time to play this morning, And so I get out of the car, and he came over to let me know that I had driven across some broken glass, and he swept the glass up so that I wouldn't roll back over it. And so then we started having a conversation, and I wound up being 2 hours late for work this day. I just hung out in the parking lot talking to this man. But he, went on to tell me about how that he was convicted for a crime that he didn't commit when he was 17. He spent, I think he spent 17 years in prison, and so, he's been in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He's finally out. When he said when he got out, his sister set him up. His sister lives in a really nice house in the suburbs, and had him set up with his own spot and his own, telephone. He had everything that he needed. No. But he could not stand to be inside. And so he said, I could go home. He said, I have a home that I could go to, but and his sister hooked him up with a job. He was working as a janitor at the hospital, and he just quit. He was like, I don't want to be inside. So he lives every day is just being out on the streets. And he says he helps out people wherever he finds that people need help. And he pulled out his cell phone and showed me his Facebook. He's making friends around the city with random people. But he really spoke to me that day, just in how I was about to handle that encounter. And then also just, kind of changing the face. We kind of see homeless people, but we don't see homeless people. And so, he just really opened up my heart.
Man, that's crazy. That day. Man. I always tell people 70% of the people who I really, really learn from are people who are normally on the streets 24/7.
Right.
All the time, man. There's something about them. They, and I think because they see more than we see as well.
Right.
Yeah. So they
see more because of their position right now, but they've also been through so much to even wind up out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there is also something, and that's what that man was speaking to. There is a freedom. There's a freedom in being outside of. I'm probably going to start sounding like a conspiracy theorist, Karen.
That is what it is.
But there's a freedom that is outside of all of these things, outside of these systems and outside of these homes and outside of this work. And, what I think I learned or what I think I heard from him that day is that he's living his purpose. And it doesn't look like what we all think it should look like, or it doesn't look like what, is prescribed to us, but he's every day living his purpose, and that day he did it. He made sure that my tires didn't get popped.
Exactly.
And I appreciate him very much for that.
I love that, man. That's a beautiful story, yo. That's the type of stuff I love to hear, man. Well, Anya, look, where can the people find you, for one thing, and then also, do you have anything that you would like to share with the world? And if they need anything from you, what is it that they can come to you specifically?
Yeah, so, right now I'm working as a doula full time, which means if you are pregnant, someone who's pregnant, and are just concerned about, her care, want to make sure that she has the best care during her pregnancy, want to make sure that she gets extra education that she's not going to be able to get from her doctor's offices. hit me up. So I can be found on Instagram at AnyaDoula_HTX. Anya is spelled ANYA. Doula is DOULA _HTX. On Facebook, I'm Anya Doula FCBS. AnyaDoula.com is my website. And in all of those places, you can message me and even book an appointment. So
perfect. Wow. Good stuff, man. Okay, cool. And I always check out your feed. I always I listen to your stories and everything, and I'm gonna let you know, just keep shining, yo, because it's a lot of things. Yeah, you say a lot of things, and I feel like, especially for the women, yo, I think that they really, really will appreciate the things that you do, because it's necessary, yo, in this life.
Yeah, it's all just about educating and making sure that people can take care of themselves the best way they can. That's my purpose.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, that's beautiful. All right, Anya, look, we're gonna have to set up another interview soon. But yeah, in the meantime, like I said, I appreciate you joining the Everyday Stranger podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, now. Hey, look, if you would like to be featured on the podcast, or if you would like for me to be featured on your podcast, you can always send me an email at the everydaystrangerpodcast@gmail.com, or you can contact me on Instagram, DM me at Everyday Strangers. Again, that's at Everyday Strangers. And I look forward to hearing from you, okay? All right, y'all, don't forget, tune in every Wednesday, also every Sunday, where I'll be releasing an episode every week, all right? I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your week. This is Alonzo Williams from the Everyday Stranger podcast, signing out. Peace.